Hi, Ben. We're having a hypothetical debate with our 17-year-old son and would love for you to weigh in. Should it be legal for adults to smoke in a home where children under 18 are present, knowing that the secondhand smoke presents a risk to the children? The debate is about the limits of when the government should get involved to protect the rights of someone who can't protect themselves, i.e. a minor. So, to be honest with you, I don't know enough about the science of secondhand smoke to give you an answer to that. I don't know whether the science is more like it heightens risk, but it's not super heightening the risk, and it's more like feeding your kids unhealthy food. The problem that I have is once you start saying that you're going to take kids out of the home because something could be unhealthy for the kids, based on just basic health reasons, unless you're actually beating the kid, then you could say, okay, you feed your kids French fries too often, obesity leads to heart disease, your kid's going to die, we're taking your kid out of the home. So I think you have to be very careful about these sorts of labels. But again, I don't have enough evidence. If you could show me that, the risk of lung cancer is the same for secondhand smoking for a child as it is for a person who smokes cigarettes their whole life, then it's something worth considering and talking about. Nicholas says, what's your opinion on the comparisons made between radical Islam and the Japanese during World War II? Well, there are a couple of problems with the comparison. I think that the comparison is right in a couple areas and wrong in a couple areas. One area that it's right is obviously the Japanese during World War II were fighting for a theocratic state that was centralized along tyrannical lines. Radical Islam is doing the same. The biggest problem is that it was easier to fight Japan because it was a state actor. Radical Islam spreads across boundaries. It infuses societies that are owned by the West. It infuses more moderate Islamic communities, and so it's much harder to root out. The Japanese government was fighting a war with us. Much easier to fight a war with the government than it is to fight a war with an amorphous movement. And again, it's hard to identify who exactly is a radical jihadist and who is not, because there are a bunch of different gradations of this. There are people who identify as reformers who aren't. There are people who identify as moderates who are actually in league with the Muslim Brotherhood. And then there are people who are open jihadists. I'm reading a book right now by Bernard Lewis, The Crisis of Islam, which I'll probably use as a thing I like next week, in which he talks about these sort of gradations. Ferrari, what topics should you talk about on a first date? So on a first date, you should talk about what you want to do with your life. You should talk about what you want to do for a job. You should talk about values. You should talk about what are the things that you want to bring your kids up like. Because for me, dating is not just about getting along with someone. I get along with lots of people, believe it or not. But dating for me is about the concept of marriage, right? If you're dating for marriage, then you better set the groundwork fast. And why exactly would you waste time just seeing, like, chemistry either happens or it doesn't, and guys can tell chemistry and girls can tell chemistry within the first 7-8 minutes of a meeting. Like, you've never been with somebody, it's very rare that you're with somebody where you're like, God, I have no chemistry with this person. Then half an hour later, you're like, the chemistry is fantastic. It doesn't happen. Chemistry is the easiest thing to identify. The hardest thing to identify is commonality of values. And if you ignore commonality of values, you're unlikely to have a good relationship. You should cut it off at the beginning before people get emotionally attached or involved, because it's a huge mistake not to concentrate on the deep issues before you get to the shallow ones. It's really kind of dumb. Jason says, I'm recently grieving over the loss of a beloved pet. What does your faith say about pets in the afterlife? So Judaism does not have any notion of pets in the afterlife so far as I am aware, because that is one of the distinctions between animals and human beings, that human beings have a soul and animals do not. So animals have a life force, but they don't have a soul, according to Judaism. I know that's not a popular answer, but that is the answer in traditional Judaism. Garrett says, Dear Ben, I recently visited the movie theaters and was curious if you could answer a debate question me and my sister had over a Spanish trailer that was presented before an English film. Is it racist to believe it would be more unifying for the country and there'd be less separation between cultures if we all spoke the same language? My sister told me I was racist and wrong for saying I was confused and thought it was silly to put a separate language before an English film. And it's not racist to say that you would like for everybody to speak the same language so we can have conversations together. That said, I think that we should all learn other languages so that we can spread the messages of liberty and values in other languages. It's one of the reasons I've been struggling to learn Spanish for the last 2 years unsuccessfully. And I think that it's important that we reach out beyond, quote unquote, target demographics, and we try to translate our message into as many languages as possible. Daniel said, Ben, I told my wife facts don't care about your feelings. She then looked at me in a way that made me fear for my life. Any advice? I may or may not have said it in response to her saying I'm feeling fat. Well, get a comfortable couch, dude. Unfortunately, facts don't care about your feelings is true, the fact of her feelings also does not care about your feelings. So that is the downside. Emily says, Dear Ben, do you think a widow or widower is morally obligated to try and find another spouse in order to help raise their children? P.S. I'm writing this on my birthday. Not sure the correlation, but happy birthday. As far as morally obligated to try and find another spouse to help raise their children, no, I don't think you're morally obligated to do that. I think it seems like it could be a nice thing to do, but I don't think you're morally obligated to do that. Okay, final question. Jordan says, Dear Ben, the left always claims to be the party of science, but constantly pushes the narrative that men can become women, and of course that a fetus is not a human life. As a biochem major, I know these two claims are resoundingly false. How does the left push these two narratives while maintaining their pro-science image? By yelling a lot. That's really what it is, by yelling a lot and then falsifying the science. So what they say about fetus, that a fetus is not a human life, is they draw false distinctions, they try to prevent people from seeing ultrasounds, they hide and obscure the science. About men becoming women, they will just say that it's a sociological construct without any sort of evidence to back that up. They will ignore the current science. And then they will suggest that there is science that suggests that men can become women and women can become men because there are some vague brain scan studies that are self-selected. No. So they do it basically by shouting, and then what they really are doing is they're picking on the idea that a lot of people who are in favor of pro-life positions and in favor of the idea that men and women are different are religious people. And so they by nature use the argument that if you're religious, you must be anti-science, which of course is utterly, utterly untrue. You need to make a good scientific argument for why you're pro-science, not just impugn the other guy as a religious bigot based on no science at all.